Hey everyone, Azim here. I have several models of the spinal cord in cross-section, and we're going to go over them. I'll go in great detail first on this model. I like this one because it shows the spinal cord within a bone, and then I'll go over some of the basics of these other ones. All right, so when we look at this model here of the spinal cord in cross-section within a vertebra, we first orient ourselves. We see a body of a vertebra here, so this way is anterior. We see spinous processes pointing that way, so this way is posterior. If we're looking from a superior view, that means this way is the right side, this way is the left side. We can also tell which vertebra this is, or at least a ballpark. Since the vertebra is bifid, it has a bifid spinous process, it's forked into two. This tells us it's a cervical vertebra. Also, we know that because there are arteries and veins coming up through these transverse processes that's only found in cervical vertebrae. And since it has a body, we know it's not C1, and since it has a spinous process, we know of bifid spinous process, we know it's not C7. So it's somewhere between, actually, we know it's not C2 because there's no dens coming up. So this vertebra is somewhere between C3 and C6. Now the spinal cord is protected within the vertebral canal. The vertebral canal is a big hole that this is allowed to go through. We can see that the spinal cord is additionally protected, besides by the bone, it's additionally protected by dura mater. This is representing dura mater. This is representing arachnoid. And then directly covering the spinal cord, that would be pia mater. And this space in between, that's the subarachnoid space where excess cerebrospinal fluid will flow. And the cerebrospinal fluid will additionally protect the spinal cord. It'll cushion it. Since we know this way is posterior, another word for posterior is dorsal, then we can name different parts of this spinal cord. The white matter, those are columns. The gray matter, those are horns. So these white columns, these are posterior white columns. You can also call them dorsal white columns. Posterior white columns, lateral white columns, and anterior white columns. The posterior white columns are primarily for ascending sensory tracts. The lateral white columns are a mix. You can have ascending sensory tracts. You can also have descending motor tracts. Tracts, by the way, are where you find axons of neurons. And then here in the anterior white columns, you can also find a mix of both ascending sensory and descending motor tracts. With the gray matter, this is the posterior or dorsal horn. I like to call it the dorsal horn, the lateral horn, and the ventral horn. Gray matter has neuron cell bodies. White matter has axons, gray matter has cell bodies. In the dorsal horn, you can find the cell bodies of second order sensory neurons. So dorsal horn is for sensory, both visceral sensory and somatosensory. Lateral horn is for visceral motor neurons. Visceral motor neurons are autonomic neurons, like sympathetic, I guess specifically sympathetic neurons. Oh, you can have parasympathetic as well. Sympathetic or parasympathetic neurons. And then in the ventral horn, we have somatic motor neurons. In the ventral horn, somatic motor. Now leading into and out of the spinal cord, we have these roots. These are called roots. Roots are where axons extend in or out of the spinal cord. So now we're getting to the peripheral nervous system. The spinal cord is central. This is peripheral. This is the dorsal root, and this is the ventral root. The dorsal root is for afferent axons, axons that are sensory. Afferent because it approaches the spinal cord, and then the ventral root is for efferent, for exiting. So since we have sensory neurons here, there could be neurons that extend into the spinal cord and then synapse with sensory neurons. Or we can have a motor neuron here, a somatic motor neuron, that starts here and extends out the ventral root. Regardless, axons bundle together in these nerves that come off of the spinal cord. Spinal nerves are mixed, both sensory afferent and motor efferent. You'll notice this bulge here that extends from the dorsal root. There is no bulge for the ventral root, only for the dorsal root. This bulge is called the dorsal root ganglion. And a ganglion is where you can find neuron cell bodies outside of the spinal cord. And so this is a place outside of the spinal cord extending from the dorsal root where you can find neuron cell bodies, the dorsal root ganglion. You can find somatosensory and visceral sensory neuron cell bodies here. Somatosensory and visceral sensory. So for example, if this is for sensing something from my hand, dendrites would be in my hand, axon would continue into the dorsal root ganglion, and you'd find the cell body here, and the axon would then continue into the spinal cord. Additional features that you can find in the center of the spinal cord, that's the central canal. This allows for cerebrospinal fluid flow that started from the brain and goes down the spinal cord and then will exit into the subarachnoid space. Features of the spinal cord, this wrinkle at the top, since this is the posterior side, this is the posterior sulcus, the posterior median sulcus. It's just a wrinkle. But here, it's a deeper fissure. This is the anterior median fissure. And it's not shown here, it's actually shown on this model. In the anterior median fissure, you can find blood vessels running along it. You don't have that. You don't have the same large blood vessels going on the posterior side. You only have a large, like this large artery on the anterior side. There's this also sliver of white matter that goes just above the anterior median fissure. The model over here actually shows it better. There's a sliver of white matter. This is called the anterior white commissure. Not to be confused with the anterior commissure in the brain. This is the anterior white commissure in the spinal cord. And in this area, we can get crossing over of axons. We can get decussation of axons. So this is a really important place when we go over spinal pathways, nervous pathways that go through the spinal cord. So let's recap some of those major features. Posterior white column, lateral white column, anterior white column. Dorsal horn, lateral horn, ventral horn. Central canal, anterior white commissure. Dorsal root ganglion. Ventral root. They combine together to form a spinal nerve, and this would extend to other parts of the body. This model is really useful because it shows you those neurons. Here you can see a somatic motor neuron. I'm sorry, it's the black one. Here's the somatic motor neuron extending from the ventral root out the ventral horn. Here's a visceral motor neuron, an autonomic neuron in the lateral horn extending out the ventral root. And then here is a somatosensory or a somatosensory or a visceral sensory neuron extending from wherever you're sensing something and leading into the dorsal horn. So that is the spinal cord and related structures. Hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.